Efraim Zuroff, thank you so much for joining my podcast here today.
Okay, happy to be here and to
Uh,
reach your audience in Norway.
Thank you so much. You are in Jerusalem right now, is that right?
That's correct.
What's it like right now in Jerusalem?
Well, it's very warm, and today we're preparing for the commemoration of Holocaust Memorial Day, which will start tonight. And tomorrow is the day. And actually, this time for me, it's very exciting because I'm the subject of a tribute by the Beckheim Center for my 40 years of trying to facilitate justice, bring Nazi war criminals to justice.
Wow, that is great. Congratulations on that. I think that's a proper reward for you, and to be able to be mentioned like that in such circumstances. So that's great that they do that.
Well, I'm very thankful to them.
Yes. I want to get into your background. It's so interesting. I have here, just reading about you, I have here a copy of the Jerusalem Post where I'm reading about you. The title is The Last Nazi Hunter. And I'm so interested in this. So can you take us a little bit back in your history? Like, where did you grow up, and where did you live in your childhood? And afterwards, what made you be inspired to hunt Nazis at all?
Okay, so first of all, I was born in New York City in 1948. My parents were not Holocaust survivors. I think if my parents had been survivors, I don't know if I could have done what I did. But I come from a very activist background. Already in high school, we were demonstrating against Soviet legation in New York to free the Jews of the Soviet Union to leave to go to Israel. And I was very involved in that, very involved in the cause of Israel. And I'm one of the generation of the Jews of the 67, of the war. So I'll tell you a little story. On the Sunday before the Six-Day War began in June of 1967, I was reading, there's a section of the New York Times newspaper called News of the Week in Review. And in my memory, I went to try and find this afterwards and I couldn't find it. But in my memory, I remember very clearly that there was a map, I think it was on page 3 of News in the Week in Review, of the Middle East, and lists of planes, tanks, and soldiers. On one side, there was a long list of planes, tanks, and soldiers. And on the other side, there was one statistic for planes, tanks, and soldiers. So as you understand, that was Israel. And all the long list was the Arabs. And listen to what happened. This is absolutely crazy. It's so clear in my memory. I said, "Oh my God, there's going to be another Shoah," and I was petrified. It's like, God forbid. But before I could turn around, we took care of them. I mean, Israel, had the sneak attack. And on the Egyptian and I think also the Jordanian air forces, wiped them out and went on to win a magnificent military victory, and with such wonderful implications, the return to the heartland of the land of Israel, the return to Jerusalem. So this was a time of great excitement about Israel. And later on, I was in my sophomore year, my junior year, I went to Israel. And from all over the world, young people were coming to Israel. And all of a sudden, Aliyah was an alternative. In other words, but people who had never thought of making Aliyah, or who felt close to Israel but weren't thinking of moving to Israel, They were coming from all over, from the Soviet Union, South Africa, Western Europe, United States, Canada. It was so exciting. It was so amazing that, in other words, I spent a year and we were all on a high. We didn't need drugs in that time. Anyway, so I was took some courses in the junior year in Hebrew U, and later in my senior year in Israel, in New York, finishing up my first degree, and became. I was very influenced by Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who was a historian, philosopher, and he basically brought across the importance, both religiously and historically, of the Holocaust. So that really piqued my interest. And then when I went to Israel, I did a master's in contemporary Jewry, which is basically the history, demography, and one other thing of the Jews in the 20th century. I took more courses on the Holocaust, and I had a amazingly charismatic professor called Yehuda Bauer, who emerged as the doyen of Holocaust historians. And I mean, he was fantastic. He just recently died not long ago, and we all mourn his passing at the age of 98 because he was so inspiring. And I think we used to come, we had a class on Monday from 2 to 4 in Mesa building. And everyone used to walk out of there determined to devote their lives to dealing with the Holocaust. And many of the people at Yad Vashem and in other places all over the world were his students. So, but I wanted to make history and not write history. Now, what changed was my meeting with Simon Wiesenthal, because I was appointed as the first academic director of the brand new Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles. So one of the things that made had an enormous impact on me was a story that Wiesenthal told. He was an architect. He studied architecture. He couldn't get into school in Poland because of numerous clauses, because of quotas on Jewish students. So he studied in Prague. In any event, so he told the story that he once visited a very wealthy Jew, apparently as a survivor, and this man asked him, what are you doing? So Simon said, listen, I'm not a very observant Jew, but I believe in the world to come. And when the survivors reach the world to come, they will ask, the first question they'll ask, you survivors were the lucky ones. You survived. What did you do with your lives? So Simon says, one will say I was a lawyer, one will say I smuggled American cigarettes in the DP camps, etc. I'll say, Simon Wiesenthal, will say, I never forgot you. And that hit me so hard, I'm telling you. And I've used it many times in my lectures, in his name, of course, not in my name. But that's the story in a nutshell. We want to honor the victims and bring the guilty to trial and to justice. And as I said, my preference was to make history rather than write history, even though I wrote history also, and I finished a Ph.D.
But have there been many people who took that path, who took the path of becoming wanting to find Nazis and being Nazi hunters? Have there been many people up during the years?
No, not at all. Very few.
Why not, do you think?
Normally this issue is dealt with by countries. In other words, not by individuals or by NGOs. But since very little was done, and there was very little political will to bring these people to justice, I'm talking about not only in the lands where the crimes were committed, but even in the Anglo-Saxon democracies, who absorbed thousands and thousands of Nazi war criminals who lied on their immigration interviews and applications, and United States had allowed the entry of 10,000 Nazi war criminals. About 150 of them were the people who worked on the V2 rockets. And like I say, the minute the World War II was over, the Cold War began, and the Americans were frantic. They were hysterical that the knowledge on the ballistic missiles, the most advanced ballistic missiles in the world, which the Germans had, and those are the V2s, would fall into the hands of the Soviets. So you had 150 people who, scientists, engineers, and technicians who were admitted because of their knowledge, but they also had several dozen people who they trained to return. They were from Eastern Europe, to return to their native countries. They were all caught by the KGB, as far as I understood, and they got what they deserved. and the rest were people who just lied and weren't caught, except by people like me and others. But the Americans were the most successful of the Anglo-Saxon democracies in terms of punishing the Nazi war criminals who lied on their immigration. So, according to records, they were successful against 109 Nazi collaborators or criminals, as compared to Australia, 3 trials, no convictions; England, 1 conviction; Canada, almost nothing. And anyway, I could go on and on.
What does that kind of statistic tell you? Has there been an unwillingness by countries to deal with this, to punish the Nazis for their atrocities? Has there been a lack of interest?
A lack of political will, that's for sure. We had to force them, we had to embarrass them into passing laws to enable prosecution. But when the time came to apply those laws, it was a catastrophe, absolute catastrophe. Australia had hundreds and hundreds of people. I personally sent them 498 suspects, names of suspects, and where they were and what they did. I'm telling you, listen, in England, it was crazy. It took us 4.5 years to pass the law because the House of Lords rejected it twice. It's only because of the very wonderful involvement of Greville Jana, who was one of the leaders of the Jewish community, and he had been a member of parliament, then later in the Lords. He created a lobby together with Merlin Rees, who was the former Home Secretary, non-Jew from Wales, and they fought very hard to get that law passed, because the first time the government submitted to the House of Commons, it passed the Commons. It went to the Lords, and the Lords, who were basically the people who admitted these people into Great Britain, they rejected it, and they made the most anti-Semitic statements. This is Old Testament justice, an eye for an eye. You know, I was in the gallery. I thought I was going to puke. You know what I mean? It was just absolutely terrible. Second time the Thatcher government presented the bill, it passed by a larger majority. Again, the House of Lords rejected it. And then, thank God, Margaret Thatcher had it submitted the third time, and the Lords rejected it, but that rejection couldn't work. In other words, wasn't taken, and Queen Elizabeth signed the bill, thank God, and they started investigating. But the problem was they didn't want to hire any Jews in the prosecution team because they were afraid that they'd be accused of prejudice. And the results spoke for themselves. Only 1 conviction.
How do you account for this? How do you account for this unwillingness? What is that? How do you explain it?
Let's get let's get away from World War II. Let's forget about it. Let's go on and live our lives and just forget about it. And as far as the victims, well, they were only Jews. No, that's not true. There weren't only Jews.
Yeah.
But
is it also that unwillingness to take on the responsibility of what countries did towards Jews, that it wasn't just the Nazis who did that, but also local inhabitants in the different countries who participated in it? So you don't want to touch it. You just want to sweep it under the rug. That never happened. We don't want to deal with that stuff.
But those countries in Eastern Europe who were involved, actively involved, and very significantly involved in this, were under communist domination. So there were treaties, there were, trials there, because the only good thing you could say about the Soviet Union was they took the matter of collaboration with the Nazis very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
They took hundreds of people. Hundreds of people were put on trial, or maybe even thousands. If you put all the countries, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Croatia, and Romania, Hungary, Poland. So if you put them all together, I think it's thousands were put on trial. And I say my assessment is the only good thing that you can say about the Soviet Union is they took the Nazi collaboration with Nazis seriously. But once they made the transition to democracy, what they did is they cooked up a totally false narrative of the Holocaust. They didn't deny the Holocaust. They said, "Oh, what a tragedy! The Holocaust. The Nazis came and they murdered our Jews. Boo! Who murdered them? Most of them were murdered by their nationals, especially Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Croatia, especially. Wow."
Yeah, that's what I recognize too after reading a lot about this, is that a lot of countries try to play that narrative that the Nazis came here. They were the ones who brought the anti-Semitism, and I don't think that is. I think that they awoke the latent anti-Semitism that was there already. They just played those strings like a guitar, like an instrument.
Much a more accurate description, what you just said.
Yeah, I feel like that. My own personal story, that's why I'm doing this podcast also. A lot of it is because my great-grandmother was killed in the Holocaust too, here in Norway, deported from Oslo to Auschwitz. And the Germans didn't even have to do the dirty work here in Norway, because the Norwegian police, they were just fine going out and arresting Jews here, and then leaving them off, signing them off to the Germans, the Nazis at the docks. They didn't even have to go and do it themselves. So I feel like a lot of this has to do with locals and local governments, and a lot of them agreeing to the Nazi ideology, actually.
Right, you're 100% correct. And one of the problems that we confronted and we fought against, and we had some results, was that those countries initiated a rehabilitation program in which they canceled the convictions by Soviet courts, of communist courts, of the crimes that they had committed. Now, on May 2nd, 1990, Lithuania passed a bill to start the rehabilitation process, and the bill said specifically, anyone who participated in genocide cannot be rehabilitated. But we caught them. I was able to get the transcripts of 12 trials in which people who were involved in Holocaust crimes, one where the guy was in Majdanek, he was a guard in Majdanek, other one murdered Jews in Lithuania, etc. And we made the front page of the New York Times on the day after Lithuania was admitted to the UN. And they were saying, no, impossible. So we got on them, I'm telling you, and we went to Lithuania. The Lithuanians ultimately agreed to a joint commission of Lithuania and Israel to check all this, okay, to see if this was true, if our accusations were true. And I went with Dan Meridor, the justice minister, and Dov Levine, the premier historian of the Jews of Lithuania in the Holocaust and before. And we went to Lithuania and we made a deal. Any case that involved murder, they would send to us and we check if it was a Holocaust case. And guess how many cases they sent us?
Yeah,
Zero. Zero.
Oh
It is a damn case. Then we went to Lithuania again, a different delegation. Segal's son was the mayor of Ramla. Yovska Melamed, he was the chairman of the Lithuanian Jews from Lithuania, and we went to the archives, and we found a lot of cases dealing with murder. And then they were supposed to send them to us. How many do you think they sent us? Zero. Anyway, listen, I'm the most hated Jew in Lithuania, and believe me, it doesn't bother me. I'm proud of it.
So let's talk about some of the
Story. Listen, Henrik, I'll never get a story that in the main paper, the most reputable paper in Lithuania, they put a picture of me, okay, and I was under a sign, a stop sign. It said, in other words, it said stop, and it's me, and it says anyone who committed crimes should be held accountable.
Wow. Do you still have that? Do you have a cutout of that?
It's on my bulletin board. What are you talking about?
Crazy. But let's talk about some of the big fishes that you've caught. What are like? I want to hear some examples of what the process was like for you to when you're going to go out and catch a Nazi. Like, how does that start? How do you investigate? How do you go about trying to find this guy? Do you have some good examples of a case like from start to end?
Yes, I have quite a few cases from start to end. And I've written about them in my books. And the one that I always cite as the most important, most successful project was the extradition and conviction of a man named Dinko Shakic, who was one of the commanders of the most terrible camp in the Balkans, Jasenovac. And what happened was that, I don't know if you know this, there were two escape networks for Nazi war criminals to escape, okay?
The rat lines.
One, rat lines, exactly. So one was run by an Austrian bishop by the name of Alius Hudo, who had a seminary, hold on a second, who had a seminary in Rome, and he gave the people a choice to either to escape to South America, primarily Argentina, but not only Argentina, because quite a few went to Brazil, a couple to Paraguay, one to Bolivia, that's Bobby, and Chile is Walter Ralph. So they had a choice of choosing their destination. But there was another network that I found out about later on, which was run by Ustasha priest, Kronislav Dragonovich, who brought people to Argentina. Among them, Ante Pavelic, who was the head of state of the independent state of Croatia, a mass murderer, someone who launched three genocide campaigns. One against Serbs, one against Jews, and one against Roma, gypsies. And many of them were murdered in Jasenovac. There were absolutely inflated figures about the number of victims in Jasenovac during the communist rule. I don't know if you realize this, but the communists inflated all these figures. When I first went to Auschwitz, they had plaques right next to the crematorium, the area of the crematorium, which said that 4 million people were killed in Auschwitz. But it's not true. And later on, when Poland made the transition to democracy, they set up a committee of scholars who reached the conclusion, and it's a serious conclusion, that 1.3 million people were murdered in Auschwitz, among them 1.1 million Jews. So, in any event, Dingo Šakić ran away to Argentina. And this idiot, you'll excuse me, he was an arrogant son of a bitch. The minute Croatia got independence, he started giving interviews under his own name. He never even changed his name. So we worked with a Argentinian journalist called Jorge Camarasa, Zichrono Livracha. His memory should be a blessing. Passed away, unfortunately. And he found Dingo Šakić living in Santa Teresita, south of Buenos Aires. Now, he took a TV crew, and he went with my colleague, Sergio Rita, who was head of the Buenos Aires office of the Wiesenthal Center. And he knocked on Šakić's door. And who comes to the door? Dingo Šakić. So Camarasa says, "You are Dingo Šakić." He said, "Yes." "You were the commander of Yasenov's?" He goes, "Yes." So let me stop there for a minute. Normally, under these circumstances where someone is discovered and accused of some terrible crimes, the answer is either it's not me, mistaken identity, or it's me and I didn't do it. Okay? So Camarasa says to him, and he has the TV camera right behind him. Okay, they film everything, and the irony of the story was it was shown on Yom HaShoah in throughout the world the next day. This film of this. So he goes. I said, so Camarasa says to him, "Listen, I have a couple of questions I want to ask you." "Oh, come in. He's sitting in his living room. And Camarasa says to him, "You were the commandant of Jasenovac. You know about the horrible mortality rate in your camp and all the murders? What do you have to say for yourself?" "What are you talking about? The mortality rate was normal for such a place." Okay, well, maybe some people had typhus, but anyway. And he says, "I'll tell you what the problem was. The problem was they didn't let us finish the job." Now, you know what that means? That means killing all the Serbs, all the Jews, and all the Roma. Okay? 3 genocides. Then he said, if someone gave me an opportunity to return to be the commandant of Yasenov's, I would do it gladly.
So that's perhaps what that was. He was proud. That's why he admitted his name, because he was proud of what he did.
Of course. Now, what I did immediately was to send letters to the government of Serbia and to Croatia, and asked one of them that he must be extradited to face trial. Now, the Croatians actually did it to save him from the Serbs, because they knew that if he was put on trial in Serbia, he'd be hung on the highest tree in Belgrade at 5 minutes after the verdict. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not by much. Okay, and they put him on trial, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Now, he died in the course of those 20. He died after 12 years in prison, and he asked to be buried in his Ustasha uniform. Now, listen to this. If you want to understand why I have problems with Holocaust distortion in Croatia, is very simple. The person, Vjekoslav Lasic, is a Dominican priest. He gave what do you call it? The
eulogy.
The eulogy, that's the word I'm looking for. The eulogy. Said like this: it's true that Dingo Šakić did not observe all the 10 commandments, and you'll excuse me if I interject, like thou shalt not murder, but it was a symbol for Croatia.
Crazy.
You're not kidding, crazy. Anyway, we got this priest banished from Croatia, because every year he memorial mass for Ante Pavlich, who was even a bigger criminal than Dinko Shakic.
What do you think it was, by the way, with Argentina? Why were they so happy to welcome Nazis over there? Why were they so interested in that?
Okay, first of all, there were a lot of Germans pro-Nazi in Argentina already. And they were happy to welcome them, and Perón was sympathetic to them. And Perón thought that he would improve the level of science and knowledge by bringing Germans to Argentina. And it didn't bother him.
He was a sympathizer.
Yeah, of sorts, yeah. Now, of course, you know that the archives are being opened. All the documents are going to be revealed. President Melia is a great friend of Israel, a wonderful, patron of Jewish causes. I think he's even contemplating converting to Judaism. And the whole thing is brand new. So again, you see, it's political will.
Yeah. So, are you excited about these archives to be able to read them?
Right. I'm not involved, but because most of the people who were responsible are already in hell, and as well as the people the criminals who ran away. So it's not. Yeah. It's more for history than for practical justice.
Of course. Actually, in regards to that story, I've seen lots of these things online on X and everything about revamping this. I think it's a conspiracy theory about Hitler not actually killing himself in Germany while escaping to Argentina instead. What's your comment about those theories?
Bubba mices. Do you know what that is?
No, what is that?
My grandmothers.
There's so many theories.
It's not true. The Russians have his skull. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's the kind of person who no one will believe, or many people will not believe that he's dead, because he's like he's demonic.
Yeah. This guy Adolf Eichmann, didn't he also escape to Argentina?
Yes, he did. Yes.
Yeah.
And you know what? You want to know how he was caught? One of the most amazing stories. Eichmann's sons went by the name Eichmann. In other words, his wife went to Argentina initially, and he had 3 boys with him who were born in Germany, and a 4th who was born in Argentina. And one of those boys had a girlfriend. And that girlfriend's father was a half-Jew who had been in Dachau. And the name Eichmann made something. It made some, it had a resonance. So he wrote to Fritz Bauer, who was a German prosecutor, Jew, social democrat. And what he did was he didn't tell the Germans that apparently Eichmann was alive in Argentina, because he was afraid that they would tip him off and he would run away. So he went to Ben-Gurion and he told him that Eichmann is living outside Buenos Aires. Now, what happened was that this didn't happen quickly. Ben-Gurion apparently was somewhat reluctant maybe to do something. So Fritz Bauer went and banged on the table in Ben-Gurion's office and said, if you don't send a team and kidnap him and bring him to Israel and put him on trial, I'm gonna really attack you, criticize you very badly. So he did it. So because those idiots kept the name Eichmann, thank you very much. You're really helping us.
Yeah. Do you in your career doing the Nazi hunting? I would assume that also the Mossad was very interested in catching these guys and tracking them down. Were you sometimes collaborating with them?
Not at all. No, they never
Not at all?
offered any evidence. No, they
Really?
had their own. Listen, they had their own attempts to take measures against some of the people, like Walter Ralph in
Yeah.
Chile, Klaus Barbie in Bolivia, Horst Schumann, the doctor who was in Ghana. But he was extradited, and they didn't. They actually, the Mossad published a composition on all the attempts that they made, and none of them were successful. That's the truth. Franz Mauer and others, all of them were failure,
Huh.
except Eichmann, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
But even Mengele, Tzvi Aharoni, what happened was it was a two-stage operation, the Eichmann thing, because they wanted to first make sure that the person whom they thought was Eichmann was indeed Eichmann. And they spent one operative, Tzvi Aharoni, from the Mossad, and he saw him face to face, and he said, yes, it's him. Okay. He went back home, and then they sent in the team to kidnap him. Now, he also was sent to try and see if he could find Mengele, and if Israel could extradite, and in other words, kidnap him or murder him. And this was in Brazil, in a remote area of Brazil, and Aharoni's assessment was that a team of Mossad agents could never get out alive if they killed him or kidnapped him. So
he was so protected.
Yeah. So no, he died. He died of a stroke swimming in the ocean in 6 years before someone sent a letter saying that he had been arrested by the Americans and released by the Americans from a POW camp.
Yeah. It's so eerie to read about. I read about him yesterday, about Mengele and how he lived there in South America. And yeah, I think I read he had a carpenter shop or something, and he did like these ordinary jobs. And it's just so strange to be able to think that these people, these horrible mass murderers, were just so careless. Like, okay, the war is over. What else? Now I'll go take a normal job. It's like, it seems like they have no guilt, no remorse, no nothing. They could just live on afterwards, like nothing had happened.
Listen, in all the cases that I dealt with, I never encountered a single word of regret from any Nazi war criminal. You know, I spoke a lot during the times when many teachers from all over the world were coming to Yad Vashem for courses, which has stopped more or less since the October 7th. But some of the teachers would ask me, you know, so many years have passed, maybe the people regret what they did. But there was never a moment of regret or anything, except one trial lately, the belated trials in Germany, after they changed the prosecution policy of this Immergard Forschner, who was the secretary of Stutthof. And she said at one point, I'm sorry for everything. But she never admitted that anything actually took place there. What she's sorry for.
Did you ever get to speak to some of the guys you caught as a Nazi hunter? Did you ever get to have a conversation with them?
No, and I never tried to do it, and I never wanted to do it, because the moment they start talking about their families or something like that, that might weaken my resolve to take them to justice. So I stayed away from it. And it's on purpose.
Yeah, I understand. Let's talk about the times we live in now. Anti-Semitism and Holocaust distortion. Do you see any, with your line of work, with your background, what do you think about anti-Semitism today in 2025?
Listen, there's no question that there's been an upsurge of anti-Semitism, and it's a cause for concern, of grave concern, because it affects the Jewish students in the colleges where there are encampments. and all these 90% of these people are totally ignorant of what happened on October 7th. They believe the lies of Hamas. Within 2 days, the perpetrators became victims, and the victims became perpetrators. That's classic distortion, by the way. And we can thank the Soviets for that. In other words, I want to explain something to our audience. There were many monuments built in the countries, the communist countries after World War II, which were ruled by communist dictators. Now, the captions that they put on the monuments and the mass murder sites were identical in almost every single place. The caption was, "To the victims of fascism." Oh, how interesting. Who were the victims of fascism? Who turned them into victims of fascism? And that's what the Russians wanted, because, first of all, as far as they were concerned, the battle against the Nazis was an ideological battle between communism and Nazism, and the communists won. Another thing was this myth of the brotherhood of the peoples of the Soviet Union. In other words, there were over 100 nationalities in the Soviet Union. And what can hold them together? I mean, what's the glue between these people? So it supposedly was the brotherhood of brothers in communism. But what happened there was Hungarian communists killed Jews, Estonian communists killed Jews, Latvian communists killed Jews, and they killed Jewish communists. So I mean, what's this brotherhood of communists? It's total bullshit. Excuse me. And that's what it was. I'm telling you. So I'll give you a classic case of distortion. When Lithuania became independent in 1990, or they took independence in 90 and they were recognized in 91, they were, of course, very concerned about their security. Who's going to protect them against the return of the Soviets, of the Russians? So what do you think they wanted to do? They wanted to join NATO or the European Union. Okay, good. But one second, how can they get in? Because the Jews have a lot of influence in Brussels and in Washington. So what are we going to say? So they decided to make a new monument in 4 languages, in Lithuanian, Russian, Hebrew, and Yiddish. Very nice. And they said that the Jews were murdered, okay? So, but what did they say about it? When the ceremony, and I was at the ceremony, the keynote speaker was the Gediminas Vagnorius, the president or prime minister of Lithuania, said that no one can besmirch the reputation of a country that did so much to save their Jews. All of this took place in a little more than an eye blink, 3 months. What the hell is he talking about? This is from June 41 until July 44. That's not 3 months. I don't know where he learned mathematics. Okay? So, I mean, the whole thing is total lies. The Germans came and murdered our Jews. Boo-hoo-hoo. What about all your Lithuanian murderers? Well, I don't know what you're talking about. So now listen, fast forward 32 years. The monuments at Ponar, that's the mass murder site of the Jews of Vilna and its environs, were vandalized, and someone drew the letters V and Z on the monuments, and that's what the Russians. That's what the Russians. The Russians did on their tanks and on their motor vehicles, etc. Sort of to say that the Jews are supporting Russia against Ukraine. And in the meantime, the Lithuanians are making in their pants because they're afraid that they're the next victim. In any event, the prime minister of Lithuania made a communique. She made a statement that Ponar was a very tragic chapter in the history of Lithuania. Okay, true. Nazis and others killed the Jews. Very interesting. Who are these others? Maybe they're Martians who came in spaceships and murdered the Jews, and then they ran away in the spaceship, so we couldn't catch them. You get it, of course.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think? And at the deepest level, what do you think anti-Semitism is? How far down have you been able to think and contemplate this concept of anti-Semitism at the very base level? What is it?
I think there's a very serious a difference between the Muslim anti-Semitism and the anti-Semitism, for example, of American students in colleges who are almost totally ignorant of the history of the Middle East and the situation in the Middle East and all of that. The Muslims, it's a religious thing. It's this Hamas. In other words, this is why we still have not reached peace in the Middle East, because for the Muslims, it's a religious issue. For us, I mean, to some little extent, there is a bit of religious, Judaism's right to the whole land of Israel. Okay, but Israel was willing to make a real estate deal and would have peace, but they can't, because it's a religious principle of theirs, and all the kafirim are the unbelievers. That's us, like both of us, I assume.
Yeah.
Are the problem.
But why do we see it up through history so many times? Like, it seems like history just repeats itself with pogroms and Jews being persecuted and chased out of the countries everywhere. You have to go all the time. You have to move from country to country. Like, why is this a pattern? Why isn't anti-Semitism ever going away?
Because we're, to a large extent, vulnerable. I mean, until Israel was established, we were a country without we were people without a country. Now, that's part of the reason why so many of us were killed during the Holocaust, because there was no country in the world for whom the rescue of Jews was the number one priority. In other words, if we have to be dependent on the largesse or the Rahmanis or the pity of the United States or France or other countries in South America, I mean, you saw the results. Country after country refused to change their quotas, and I'll tell you the speech of the Australian delegate at the Evian conference. So just to inform people, the Evian conference was called in the resort, the Evian Auban in France, in 1938, in the summer of 1938, to deal with the problem of the refugees. In other words, Jews, that was the problem. It was Jewish refugees. Okay, so the Australian delegate got up and said, Australia has no racial problem and doesn't want to import one. This is Australia, one of the more enlightened countries in the world, you understand? And in 1945, the Australian government wrote to the IRO, the International Refugee Organization, that we don't want Jews coming in, because they were supposed to vet the prospective refugees coming from Europe to Australia.
Oh, well, why? What is that? Why do people hate Jews so much throughout history, up until now to this day?
First of all, because of the Catholicism and Protestant. There's the Christian religion called us the guilty party. We killed Jesus. We the heathens. We never accepted him. Never accepted Christianity, and we paid the price for it. And thank God, enough of us persevered and maintained our Judaism. That's why the Jewish people exist today and are flourishing in our homeland. So, and in other places also. It's ironic because Australia has one of the finest and largest Jewish populations, and most of them are Holocaust survivors. I was the older generation. Now it's a little different, but.
But is that a large part of anti-Semitism too? You think jealousy, envy of what the Jews are able to do?
100%. A large measure of this is jealousy. In other words, we succeeded in we flourished, we prospered, despite all the restrictions on us, all the hatred towards us, all the problems that they caused us.
How do you see?
Should be very proud of that.
How do you see October 7th?
Problem for you. There's always Israel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, emergency exit.
What? How much do you have to pay? Or to get in, you might have to pay to get out, but I don't know about getting in. There's no charge.
Yeah. But how do you see October 7th? Do you see that as an act of anti-Semitism?
Of course, there's no question it's an anti-Semitism. Read the Hamas charter. That's, but it's not the Shoah. We have to be very careful. This is not the Shoah. This is a pogrom. It's not the Holocaust. So I'll tell you what I wrote. I'm very proud of an op-ed that I wrote several months ago, and I said the following: don't look for precedents of the Shoah in the Shoah for 9/11, for October 7th. Think of two acts of terror which were carried out in relatively recent years, where terror groups, or in one case a terror group, in one case a sovereign country, attacked a democracy, which was the United States, and they created tremendous. It took many victims, and as many people were murdered, and a lot of damage was done. And the perpetrators thought that they had done something fantastic, little realizing that what they did was the beginning of their end. And I'm talking about Pearl Harbor and the Twin Towers. They thought that they destroyed liberalism, destroyed freedom, destroyed America, and it was such a joke. I mean, what did they achieve by doing those things? And what did America achieve by destroying them? And look at the Japanese now; they're they're very, very peaceniks now, big peaceniks, Japan. And look what happened to ISIS. So we can say hallelujah.
What do you think about the legal term genocide, which is being tossed around, and South Africa putting this case up against Israel, trying to get them convicted of genocide? What do you think about this?
Okay, I've done a lot of work to prevent the use of the term genocide in cases like this. So I, for example, was very involved in helping the Serbian government prevent or at least engineer a defeat of the resolution by Bosnia-Herzegovina that Srebrenica was genocide. And I'll explain very simply. Genocide was a term coined by Rafal Lemkin, a Polish Jewish lawyer in Poland in the 30s, or maybe in the 40s. I'm not sure about exactly when, but in any event, it means an intention to totally wipe out a specific race, nation, or things of the sort. So, Srebrenica, there were 33,000 people. It was supposed to be a haven created by the UN so that people could escape from the Serbian troops that were pursuing the Muslims and people who were fighting them. Now, of the 33,000 people, approximately 5,000 people were killed. Those were people who were military age and had participated in the fighting against the Serbs. All the others, all the women, all the children, all the elderly were allowed to go home scot-free, 28,000 out of 33,000 people. That's no genocide. And on the other end of this, and I am very astonished by this, is that the Americans continue to refuse to call Rwanda genocide. Rwanda, 800,000 Tutsis were murdered, and some moderate Hutus were murdered. I mean, what are they talking about? Clinton refused to send American troops to Africa, so it's not a genocide. And it's to this day that way. I was told that the American government and the American State Department holds on to this idiotic decision that Rwanda is a civil war, not a genocide.
But why do you think South Africa has an interest in trying to drag Israel into court?
They paid for it. The ANC was in deep debt. And the Iranians paid them off to take Israel to the Court of Justice in The Hague. And it's well known. It's well known in South Africa what they did, and also outside South Africa now.
But what do you think that saying that Israel is committing genocide, is that anti-Semitism?
Undoubtedly, yes. That's a form of anti-Semitism. It's besmirching, in other words, saying the worst things about the people of Israel, the Jewish people, and making up lies which have no basis in truth.
You know, here in Norway, we have these so-called, experts in human rights and legal experts, and almost unanimously, unfortunately, here in Norway, a lot of people are writing in the newspapers and op-eds and everything, saying that now we have sufficient facts to say that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinian people. That's the kind of rhetoric that we have here. What do you think about that kind?
Listen, those people want to make up for the Norwegian collaboration with the Nazis. They want to erase it. So if the Jews are committing genocide, hallelujah, we're off the hook.
Yeah. That's what I've been thinking too. And it's easier to deal with the memory of Holocaust emotionally to say that, hey, they're just as bad themselves.
Henrik, it's a false equivalency, a totally false equivalency. That's the heart of it.
It's just like saying that, the Jews were kind of responsible for the Holocaust themselves. It's like the same kind of thing.
I mean, how ridiculous can it get? I'm saying, you know what I mean? But when it comes to Jews, the most ridiculous things are said and shouted and sung and demonstrated for.
Are you worried about the rise of anti-Semitism that we see everywhere for Jews?
Of course, I'm worried. I'm worried about the vandalizations here. I'll give you an example. Apparently he was a Norwegian, I think they said, who vandalized the Chabad in Nepal.
Yes.
What does that have to do with Nepal? I mean, this is ridiculous. It's against Jews, no? Those are the Jews in Nepal. That's the Chabadnikim. And
I also
backpackers.
And I also think about the fact that Jewish professors and Jewish students are not allowed to get into campus like in the United States. I just see these eerie parallels to what it was like in the 1930s. That's how it started in academia, right? With Jews not being allowed on campus and in the universities.
I have news for you. There were Jews in Germany in the early 30s who supported the Nazis initially. And they wrote to Hitler, but of course he rejected all their interest, all their pleas. But we have the same thing today. We have these idiot Jews, you'll excuse me, who go out of their way to show how liberal, how supposedly humanitarian they are, at the expense of the Jewish people. They're co-religionists. But I can promise you that there will be almost no Jews who are observant Jews who would do a thing like this. Good Jews have primary loyalty to the Jewish people. That's a caveat. It's a principle of Judaism. We are not only a religion, we are a people. We have a country, thank God, finally. And that's a part of the solution, of course.
Yeah, we have those kinds of groups here in Norway too, and I feel like everywhere.
Show that they're good Norwegians, not dirty Jews.
Is that a typical mechanism, the splitting between the good and the bad Jews?
Listen, most of them are assimilated Jews, and you'll excuse me if I tell you that I was in Norway and I met a lot of Jews, and there are very few Jews who are really very, very Jewish. But that's why it happens. Okay, listen, no people are perfect, okay? No people are perfect. And we too, I admit, are not perfect. And some of us in every country in the world are jerks, idiots, and they're doing a lot of damage to their own people. And maybe one day they'll see the light.
What do you think about the split between people saying that, hey, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just an anti-Zionist?
Of course, that would make it legitimate. You understand? That would give it a legitimate base, and it would take the blame off them. But that is, of course, ridiculous.
What is like a final question here before we go in for landing? What is Zionism to you?
Zionism is support for a sovereign Jewish entity, political entity in this horrible world of ours. It's not totally horrible, but a world that has proven itself very dangerous for Jews all over. But we have survived. Am Yisrael Chai. Don't forget that.
Exactly. Efraim, thank you so much for being on my podcast today. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for having me. And thank you and hello to all the people I know in Norway and the other Jews. And I give them chizuk to remember to fight the good fight. And if worse comes to worse, there's always Israel.
Yes. Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Bye-bye.